The Biden administration has spent $700,000 to create a national pregnancy prevention program for transgender boys.
The EPA didn't report $7 billion, and the response is to give them $12 billion in 2024. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hello, everybody, and happy Monday. So I'm going to start with something that is totally not our topic today. But right before we sat down to record this podcast, I came across this article on my feed, Stephanie, so I have to bring this up. And we talk a lot about China on this podcast. We've had multiple discussions about China buying up U.S. farmland. And then on Saturday, the Daily Mail reported that a Chinese billionaire and CCP member named Chen Tianqiao, I hope I said that right, is the second largest foreign owner of farmland in the United States. And nobody knew this until recently. Apparently, this guy bought 198,000 acres of farmland in Oregon back in 2015 for $85 million. But the purchase doesn't show up anywhere in any government records of land ownership by foreign investors. And this only came to light last week when Oregon tax records were made public, naming one of Chen's companies as the beneficial owner of the property. So this guy owns a $39 million townhouse in Manhattan. He owns a $26 million estate in Los Angeles, and his combined land holdings make him the largest Chinese owner of U.S. real estate. And according to the New York Post, this guy joined the CCP when he was 18. He's risen through the executive ranks of the party. He's held various executive roles in CCP-affiliated organizations. And he's the co-founder of a company that's called Shonda Interactive Entertainment. And this is an online gaming company based out of California. So the article talks about how it's really not clear why Chen's huge land purchase doesn't appear in government records because the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, which I believe dates back to the 70s, requires foreign investors to report any new interest in American agricultural land to the Department of Agriculture within 90 days of purchase. And USDA statistics show that CCP-linked firms already own 350,000 acres of American agricultural land. That was as of December of 2022. And that number clearly does not include Chen's almost 200,000 acres. So basically, this means that CCP-related investors own almost 550,000 acres of American land. And according to the Daily Mail, the USDA annual report says that its record of Chinese investments in U.S. agriculture should be, quote, interpreted as a minimum, given that in some cases the primary shareholding country cannot be determined, end quote. Stephanie, why would an online gaming entrepreneur need to purchase 200,000 acres of farmland in Oregon?
Well, he's doing it on behalf of the CCP, and that's the thing. In China, when you're wealthy, like the Communist Party pretty much owns you. Like they don't let you leave and spend your money elsewhere unless it's for a reason. So clearly he's doing this on their behalf. And it makes me wonder, if we didn't know about this, how many other people have done this from China or other countries? And it's like, we know that they've established police stations here. We know that they've established all this farmland throughout the United States. For all we know, they could be establishing military bases, communities. Like, what else do we not know? I mean, this is so deeply concerning. And I would think the only reason they'd want to buy this much farmland is because they plan on taking over at some point.
Right. Exactly. So I just thought that was important to bring that up, even though it has nothing to do with our topic today. So moving on to our topic, and that is the Biden administration spending so far in 2024. So this came out last week. According to federal grant records, the Biden administration has spent $700,000 to, I sometimes have such a hard time saying this shit with a straight face, to create a national pregnancy prevention program for transgender boys. Yep.
Oh my God.
Yes, as reported by the Daily Caller, $700,000 in funding was given to the Center for Innovative Public Health for a grant. And okay, this is for a text messaging program that was originally designed for, quote, cisgender sexual minority girls, end quote. And I'm going to like go off on a brief tangent here, but what the fuck is a cisgender sexual minority girl? Like, what does
I
that even
don't I don't even know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around why transgender boys need a pregnancy prevention program.
Yeah, and this is for the age range of 14 to 18. And the purpose is to, quote, address social and structural influences of sexual behavior in transgender boys, end quote. And the grant description states that transgender boys, which AKA biological females, quote, may be less likely to use condoms when having sex with people who have penises and are at least as likely as cisgender girls to get pregnant, end quote. Okay, Stephanie, I am so sick of this shit. Like, people who have penises are called boys or men, and cisgender girls are just fucking straight females. Like, this is such nonsense. And I absolutely refuse to use this bullshit made up terminology. We've talked about this many times. I don't give a fuck if you're a straight female or a lesbian or a bisexual or a transgender or a straight male or a gay dude or a bisexual guy or a transgender. Like, I don't fucking care, but I am not using one of the 75 to 100 made up words that have been created so people can feel better about themselves. Like, enough of this shit.
Well,
But
yeah, and then they like insist on calling us cisgender like it's something
yeah,
bad. It's like, no, I'm like a straight female. Like that's it. We're not calling me a cis female or cisgender or whatever the hell you want to call it. That's ridiculous. Not doing it.
exactly. Yeah, I'm not doing it either. So, back to the article. Reportedly, this program is going to use focus groups to identify and give voice to the context that affects sexual decision making of transgender boys. This content will then be used to create advisory teams to ensure that the content resonates with these transgender youth. And the program is going to test its final version with 700 transgender boys nationwide. And success of the program will be measured by the rate of condom protected sex in transgender boys between the ages of 14 and 18 and the use of other types of birth control. Like, what the fuck is going on in this country?
Why are they so obsessed with like talking about sex with these minors? It reminds me of that teacher that got caught that was like sharing all types of sex toys that, you could use if you're like transgender or whatever. Like, why are we so obsessed with that? I mean, why can't we just have like a pregnancy prevention program, period? Like, here's some condoms. Like, why are we going to a rate that we need advisory teams to talk about sex with kids? I don't get it.
Well, on top of that, the Biden administration has also spent millions of dollars in multiple other grants funding transgender programs. In late December, it was revealed that the Department of Health and Human Services gave $160,000 to West Virginia University to study how parents can better, quote, affirm their child's gender. And then, according to another Daily Caller article from December 26th, the grant is for an online program to, quote, assist parents of gender diverse youth who are geographically and racially diverse to assess the factors associated with being affirming. And those factors will be used to create and test a program to help parents improve affirmation, end quote, of their children. Like, what? And this
This is
grant
like
is
someone just made up a job for themselves and put a
right.
bunch of words together to try to like justify it. So
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And this grant is going to run through April of 2028. And then back in June of last year, the National Institute of Health gave $200,000 for an online program so that LGBTQIA XYZ youth could be connected with adult mentors to, quote, promote social emotional skills. Okay. And then over $1 million was given by the Department of Health and Human Services to Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center in August of 2022 to study the risk of blood clots in transgender adolescents receiving sex change hormone therapies, which again, why are we giving fucking adolescents sex change hormone therapies to begin with? And then while we're on the subject of the LGBTQIA XYZ agenda, the Heritage Foundation reported last week that its oversight project recently obtained a very interesting document through the Freedom of Information Act, which is related to an internal USDA memo that was written by two department officials back in October of last year, talking about how the Biden administration plans to use the LGBTQI plus, I guess they didn't have an A in it, non-discrimination as a condition of giving international grants to farmers. And
What?
specifically the memo, specifically the memo states, quote, the PM calls on U.S. agencies engaged abroad to expand ongoing efforts to ensure that our engagement with government, citizens, civil society, and the private sector promotes respect for human rights of LGBTQI plus persons and combats discrimination. The PM directs the USDA, an agency engaged in foreign aid and trade to export development, to consider the impact of programs funded by the federal government on human rights, including the rights of LGBTQI plus persons when making decisions as appropriate and consistent with applicable law, end quote.
Okay,
So,
for everyone listening to the podcast that's not watching the video on YouTube, my jaw dropped open. Like, what does this even mean? Like, this is so out there. And why,
yeah,
if we have all this money to spend on ridiculous things like this, then why do we still have a homeless problem in America? Like, why are there still
yeah,
people that can't
exactly.
afford to buy groceries? This is so ridiculous.
Well, and I love this comment that the Oversight Committee posted on X last week, and they said, is the priority for farming in the third world really that the farmers are not gay, lesbian, or transgender enough? That's the Biden priority, end quote. And so, yeah, it seems that growing food and feeding people is not the real priority. It's making sure that there's gender affirming equality. And this article also pointed out that, and I didn't know about this, back in May of 2022, the Biden administration implemented a rule where they withheld school lunch funds from schools that didn't go along with pro-trans policies. And so now it makes sense why every fucking middle school has gender neutral bathrooms.
Because that's more important than making sure that the children are fed. I think that
Right.
this whole thing here explains what you said in the beginning about why we didn't know that there was this Chinese billionaire buying up farmland because we're so busy dealing with this nonsense. Like this, I feel like it's a joke, like, is this satire? No, this is real. This is really
This is
happening. And
real.
I cannot wrap my mind around it.
Yeah. And now here's another one, because now we're going to transition from the transgender agenda into the environmental agenda. So the EV program that it's been proven Americans clearly are not interested because the EV market is failing and people don't fucking want electric vehicles. But the Biden administration is still pushing this fucking hard. So the Associated Press reported that the Biden administration is awarding $623 million in grants to help build EV charging stations throughout the country. This was announced last Thursday. These federal grants will fund EV charging stations and other related projects in 22 states across the nation. And according to our dipshit transportation secretary, Mayor Pete, this grant funding is supposed to, quote, help ensure that EV chargers are accessible, reliable, and convenient for all American drivers while creating jobs in charger manufacturing, installation, and maintenance for American workers, end quote. And according to the Biden administration, disadvantaged communities are going to make up more than 70% of the 7,000 stations that they intend to build. And this money is only part of a $2 billion program that Congress set aside for these EV charging projects.
See, this pisses me off because they spent all this money last year and not one charging station came out of it, not one. And I'm
Right.
sorry, but like disadvantaged communities, once again, like, can we start by making sure that we're tackling homelessness and making sure that people can eat and like buy groceries, but no, like they're throwing money at an EV station. Like I'm pretty sure that's not a top priority for people right now.
Yeah, in areas where people can afford to buy electric vehicles in the first place.
Right. I mean, this is so ridiculous. But it goes on. Like speaking of the whole EV program, according to a Fox News article I was reading, the Biden administration is giving 67 applicants $965 million for electric school buses. So that's nearly $2 billion that they've now given for electric school buses through their Clean School Bus program. I can't even say it without a straight face. Like, it's crazy. And this came out in
I
2021.
wait, I can't even listen to it without picturing Kamala fucking laughing.
Oh, yeah. And talking about, oh,
School
don't you just
buses.
love school buses or whatever that nonsense was? Well, I'll tell you what she had to say about it. She says, quote, as part of our work to tackle the climate crisis, the historic funding we are announcing today is an investment in our children, their health, and their education. It also strengthens our economy by investing in American manufacturing and America's workforce, end quote. So again, like they're looking at this as it's doing all these great things. Meanwhile, they're not investing in making sure these kids can, you know, eat and have health care and a roof over their head. Anyhow, I could go on and on about that. But I think this right here, like as soon as I read this, I'm like, oh, okay. So that's why she hasn't been handling her job at the border with the border crisis, because she's busy changing school buses to electric school buses. That's what she's spending her time on as vice president. Great.
You know what I did read? Like, I'm gonna interrupt you real quick because you just reminded me. I did not take any notes on this, but there was an article that came out last week related to this about a school district in like a rural area of California. And the bus driver was saying, like, you're gonna end up leaving all these kids stranded and not able to get to school because they live out in rural areas where they don't have access to electric vehicle charging stations, but you're going to make them ride an electric school bus. So
Yeah.
they're not even going to be able to get to school.
Oh yeah, they have not thought this through whatsoever. Like it's scary how little they've thought through like the infrastructure part. And I couldn't help myself. Like after listening to what Kamala said, I had to pull up the clip that went viral last year when she was on stage talking about climate change. So listen really carefully to what she says.
When we invest in clean energy and electric vehicles and reduce population, more of our children can breathe clean air and drink clean water.
So I don't know, you might have missed that, but she said reducing population. When we invest in clean energy and reducing population, like she says it like it's just part of the agenda. It's like, did she say the quiet part out loud? Like, what is going on with that? Creepy. But anyhow, back to the whole school bus thing. There is one big problem, like you just said, Tara, with this whole initiative. So I guess in December, the EPA Office of Inspector General published the findings of an audit on the program that determined that the program was dependent on the utility company's ability to increase power supply. I mean, that seems like common sense, but apparently the Inspector General had to bring that to light. And in addition, they don't have the needed charging stations to power all of these buses. So the article talks about the big concern that came up in the audit, which was that the ability of utility providers to bring power lines and transformers to school districts with electric buses. And while some power providers have experience with electric bus infrastructure, they said that they've never built such infrastructure at scale. And it would take at least 2 years to build it. And the school districts that would be charging more than 25 buses would need a totally different technology that they haven't built before. And so the inspector general concluded that, quote, the agency may be unable to effectively achieve program goals unless it can ensure the school districts will be able to establish the infrastructure necessary to support clean bus and charging purchases. There could be delays in utilities constructing the needed charging stations to make the buses fully operational in a timely manner. While early coordination with utilities is not a requirement, it could prevent the agency from achieving its objective to remove older diesel buses and replace them with clean buses. The increased demand on manufacturers and utility companies may impact the timeliness of replacing diesel buses and ultimately may delay the program health and environmental benefits, end quote. So they've thought none of this through, and they're basically like just putting it on the school districts, like, hey, you have to figure out how to put in this infrastructure. Meanwhile, they're giving them money now for the buses when like none of the infrastructure is in place. And so, like, this is where I get so frustrated with the climate activists because no one seems to have common sense or foresight to look into what actually goes into having electric vehicles. And you have Biden all the time talking about how he wants all vehicles to be electric. And, he thinks he could just snap his fingers and make it happen. But if we don't even have the grid or infrastructure to support some buses, like how the hell are we going to support an entire nation of electric vehicles?
Right.
So, like, basically, all this money is going to be wasted unless they completely change the infrastructure. And obviously, that requires a lot of money. And if they change the infrastructure, I'd love to know how much carbon emissions are taking place in the process between making the buses, the charging stations, moving transformers and power supplies, because common sense tells me it would be a lot more emissions than just keeping the buses we already have. And I'd also like to point out that the rental car company Hertz is selling off 20,000 electric vehicles because they said that the rising maintenance costs, the low resale values, and low demand for electric vehicles makes it pointless to keep, purchasing these. And like this made up about a third of its fleet that they just sold off. So, like you said, Tara, it sounds like electric vehicles just aren't practical and people don't really want them right now.
Yeah.
And so while we're on the topic of the EPA, it turns out that the EPA didn't report $7 billion, billion with a B, according to an inspector general audit for the fiscal year 2022. So, according to Fox News, quote, the EPA Office of the Inspector General determined that the agency underreported its award level outlays by $5.8 billion or 99.9% and its award level obligations by $1.2 billion or 12.9% during fiscal year 2022, the period between October 2021 and September 2022. The agency further failed to report any of its infrastructure investment and Jobs Act outlays and underreported its coronavirus pandemic related outlays. The complete lack uh wait, sorry, this is a quote too. Oh, this is from the same report. So the lack of complete and accurate reporting also led to taxpayers being initially misinformed about the EPA's spending, and policymakers who relied on the data may not have been able to effectively track federal spending. This is like, how many jobs are going to, like, heads should roll, but I guarantee there will be no accountability as usual.
Billions of dollars that we don't know where it went.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And it's
Why
like,
am I surprised? But why am I surprised? Like this.
right. Well, and that's what I think too. Like all of these people, like John Kerry and, Kamala and all these people that are like for electric vehicles and everything. And then like none of this money is like really tracked. And
Mm-mm.
it makes me wonder, like, is this going to their friends? Is this, just being sent out to their buddies that are part of these in these government positions and they all share the money? Like, it's just so shady. I mean, how do you like not report $7 billion?
Right.
If any citizen did that, we would be in jail for the rest of our life. But,
Yeah.
the government can do it all they want. So, anyhow, this comes at a time when the EPA is given a record high budget due to Biden's radical climate agenda, which includes $12 billion for fiscal year 2024. So they didn't report $7 billion in 2023, and the response is to give them $12 billion in 2024. Like, what the hell has happened to this country? It's
Mhm.
pure insanity. And now Congress is requesting transparency from the EPA. House Energy and Commerce Committee Chair Kathy McCorris Rogers responded to the audit saying, quote, "It's outrageous and unacceptable that the EPA cannot keep track of its spending or inform Congress and the American people of how it's using taxpayer dollars. This eye-opening report only further highlights the need for more transparency at the EPA. It also raises questions about whether the agency is incapable of managing the record high budget or if the agency is attempting to hide the amount of taxpayer dollars it's spending to advance the administration's radical rush to green agenda," end quote. She's absolutely right. But once again, it's more Republicans just talking and nothing's going to come of it. Like, they're not going to hold anyone accountable. So now we're in yet another situation where the government shutdown over the pending budget is looming. And I'm sure that Republicans are going to cave once again to this outrageous spending. And I'm sure the EPA is going to get their whatever billions of dollars they want with no oversight or accountability on how it's spent. And I'm just getting sick of talking about it.
Do you realize that like every week some new story gets unveiled about something the administration doesn't know about, or that they didn't tell us about, or that Congress didn't know about, like, the whole debacle with the defense secretary last week, all this spending that comes out that like nobody knows where it went or where things came from. And I just want to mention one last story because it also has to do with Congress not being informed. So, in case you haven't been paying attention to the news or following anything with the Israel-Hamas war, Biden made an executive decision last week to launch 2 airstrikes in Yemen. And this was against Houthi rebels. I hope I said that right. Houthi? In retaliation. Houthi, I think so. In retaliation for like months of attacks that they've been doing on civilian ships in the Red Sea. And this group is an Iran-backed armed terrorist movement that's been in control of Yemen for like the past decade. And according to Biden, he said, quote, "These targeted strikes that the U.S. was making are a clear message that the United States and our partners will not tolerate attacks on our personnel or allow hostile actors to imperil freedom of navigation in one of the world's most critical commercial routes," end quote. That actually sounds oddly professional coming out of his mouth, but he coordinated these attacks with UK military forces, but he did not get approval from Congress. So there's been this whole shit show unfolding over the last few days with Congress questioning the legality of Biden making this decision. And not only has he pissed off Congress, but he also gave the pro-Palestinian groups something to do over the weekend, and they decided to hold a protest at the White House. And I say protest in air quotes because, as usual, this protest involved vandalism, violence, and chaos. So it seems that White House staffers had to hide and then be evacuated from the White House on Saturday because pro-Palestinian protesters were trying to breach the security fence. And there's footage of demonstrators scaling the fence. Others are attempting to break off parts of the fence. The video shows a large group of protesters violently shaking the fence while security services personnel are trying to like keep them off the Capitol grounds. And then the police show up and protesters are chanting "fuck Joe Biden" and throwing water bottles and breaking off like sticks from the placards they're holding up and throwing them at the police. And, this whole like Genocide Joe theme that's going on with the youth of America, their signs were saying like Genocide Joe has got to go. Biden has blood on his hands. Let Gaza live. And so I know this is not relevant to our topic, but we talked the other, Friday, about the elections, the upcoming elections, and how it doesn't seem like Biden's platform is going very well. And I don't think that this is going to be very supportive of his presidential campaign either.
Yeah, he's definitely, there's no way he's going to run. And I mean, the problem with what he did is, Congress is the only part of the government that can like declare war, right? And he just went and did these airstrikes. So I don't know. I don't know what they'll
I
do.
guess
I feel like
there's some kind of time limit, and I I read this, but I did not make any notes, so I could be totally talking out of my ass right now. But I think there's like a 90-day window or something like that where the president can take executive action without Congress having to approve it. But I could be totally wrong in saying that.
Well, what worries me about this, it's like we talked the other day about how he'll likely drop out after the primaries so that people don't get their chance to vote. Um, but another likely scenario is that we are, in war and the elections are postponed
Right.
because that can happen. They can declare martial law. So either way, it's not good. But yeah, he's losing a huge part of his base. I mean, this pro-Palestinian movement is it's big and it's involving a lot of people that historically voted Democrats. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months and what kind of crazy shenanigans they try to pull to keep the Democrats in power.
But meanwhile, he's just going to keep spending and spending and spending, go out with a bang.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we need more electric vehicles. Clearly, that's what is most important in the world right now. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Well, that didn't make me feel very good, but nothing else that surprises me at this point in time. So we'll keep everyone posted. Hopefully this whole thing with the Houthis does not turn into a full-blown war, but we'll see. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.